think we're live. Hello, Chris. We're live.
Hi.
I'm so excited. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're chatting about the art of Appiness. And I'm here with Chris Dancy. Chris, I'm so stoked to be here. And I want to check in with you. How are you feeling today, this morning?
I did not sleep very well thinking about today. And this morning I just got up and got real focused to finish up some of the stuff I told you I was going to do to help out, but I'm doing good. I got my heater running, but yeah.
Chris Dancy, if you don't know Chris, he's a fascinating human. And I thought today was going to be, we're just going to casually talk about this stuff. And then he sends me this epic Miro board that is unbelievable. So I'm just so excited to dig into your brain today and talk about, we're going to talk about a couple things today. I think we're going to cover some elements of neurodiversity, how we use our various different tools to support our emotional well-being. I know you and I have talked about how we see our tools as way more about emotional support than they are about productivity. So there's just a whole bunch of rabbit holes that we could go down today. So
Well, that's how this
thrilled.
got started, isn't it? I mean, I told you I had been a huge fan. You were on Keep Productive with Francesco. I think that's how I discovered you. I started on Notion, and I still have a Notion account. I still find Notion to be a really important part of my kind of arsenal of mental armor. But after I was on Francesco's Keep Productive for my Airtable, that's when I was like, wow, maybe Marie Pullen is some type of sister from another universe you're related to.
Yes.
So I started really studying just how you presented yourself. And there were so many kind of beautiful cybernetic things you did to emote that I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to find some way to work with you. And then in the past year, a lot of people with the pandemic have been exposed to, I think, abnormal amounts of stress. And the trauma of all of it started saying, okay, I need to say, Marie, let's do something. And then this week was, of course, a Mental Health Action Day on YouTube was the 20th. So I was like, okay, let's make this happen.
Perfect timing. Yeah, I love it. Welcome, everybody. I see some folks from France, from Mexico, Switzerland. Amazing. Cool. Digging into Chris's brain is to also experience his heart. Yes, exactly. We share a lot about ourselves when we share how we use our tools, right? So I feel very similar about yourself, your work, when I saw what you did with Airtable and kind of how you express the way that you use the tool and the way that you think about it. I'm like, oh yes, we need to connect on this, because it almost doesn't matter what tool you're using, right? It's just kind of, we have each found a way to use the tools in kind of similar ways, and we express ourselves in similar ways. Tools for reflection, tools for noticing what we need, right? So I would just, I don't know where you want to start, whether you want to share your board or kind of if you want to preface this conversation. But I just think what you've put together in this epic Miro board is sort of whoa, let's dig into Chris's brain. This is so exciting.
Well, yeah, we'll share their board, but maybe I'll just do some prefaces. First, I'm not a doctor. I don't think Marie Pullen is a doctor. So nothing we're going to say should be taken as medical advice. But I am someone who has struggled with anxiety and panic disorder since I was a child. I was physically abused by my father for most of my life until I was about 18, and then had a lot of trauma after that. And when I started, I think in my late or early teens, late single digits, getting on computers in the late 70s and early 80s, a lot of reporters will sometimes say to me, what got you started? And, there's a lot of reasons I talk about and give people about the whole most connected man thing. But for me, I think at the end of the day, I don't find a big difference between picking up a smartphone and meditating. Really, the intent behind both is exactly the same. Unfortunately, picking up a smartphone or using a computer in 1979 to create a spreadsheet of every Michael Jackson single you'd bought that year was pathologized by people. There must be something wrong with the child. But I just never felt that way. I never felt there was anything wrong with me until people started wanting to deconstruct how I use technology. In the past 10 years, we've spent ridiculous amounts of time deconstructing everybody's behaviors. We like to point out everybody's attention problems and everybody's, just challenges. And at the end of the day, like, who are we to really talk about those things? So, you know, today when we're going to talk about this stuff and do some demos and things, I want to preface this with, this is the way I work with my life. This is the way I work with my heart. This is the way I work with other people. I find people to be terrorizing. I struggle just going to the grocery store. I'm pleasant. I love cashiers. I sometimes will cry watching people at the deli just because no one talks to them. But people terrify me. I'm not gonna lie to you. I mean, my heart's beating really fast just saying that. And I think it's because we've gotten so used to like just mediating our relationships through our devices. You know, we're a good decade into it now, and I don't know if we realize we're mediating as much as we are. So this board is really to kind of start to unpack that, but also let's come back in and let's put the blood, sweat, and tears next to the silicone in these devices, because I don't think the two are separate. Does that make sense?
It does. And I just think it's really, I've told you before, I really appreciate you've got some really strong opinions about this that might go against the grain of what a lot of people think when we talk about, we got to disconnect from our technology. We got to disconnect. I mean, you've got a book called Don't Unplug, right? So it's like, yeah,
it's just old now.
But I'm curious what, maybe what opinions have changed since writing the book, and what has been like core, true, stands the test of time for you.
You know, I put on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and I hope nobody screenshotted it, but I don't know. And by the way, before you care about privacy, stop yourself taking screenshots. You know, so many people are like, I want my privacy, but they screenshot their partner's text messages and their friend who made them angry. You can't have it both ways, people. Sorry, I already feel myself getting ranty. Yeah,
that's great. Bring it.
I think there's some things that changed. I think there are some people who probably should unplug. You know, the book is called Don't Unplug. But, you know, the book wasn't originally called Don't Unplug, How Technology Saved My Life and Saved Yours. That's what it's called now if you go to Borders. The book originally called in the Advanced Readers Club was I Am You Tomorrow. And I liked this because I thought to myself, we're all kind of on the same evolutionary path, and like how we use things was different. But yeah, I'd say, you know, the big things, maybe some people should unplug. I think pathologizing not unplugging is just as bad as pathologizing unplugging. So I think I maybe called that one off a little bit. I know it can be overwhelming. But like, I don't know, unplug from the news before we unplug from Facebook. I don't know. I think that's probably the only thing. I think I probably shouldn't have gone so hard into, you know, don't tell people to get off the computer, because maybe you need to. I don't know. Maybe some people should. I don't know. But I mean, again, we'll talk about this on this board, because I have a section too about kind of the 4 triggers that if you find yourself doing one of these things, maybe you should unplug or use a tool. And we've it's some tool suggestions.
Awesome. Should we open up this board and start going through? Because I feel like it's a whole gorgeous, beautiful maze of.
It's a whole world.
Chris's brain. It's incredible.
So we shared this link, and this board will be open to anybody. You can come and look at it. You can read the text on it. I spent some time. I told Maria, I said I wanted to be a good partner, so I said I'm going to take some time to kind of build this out. But the board, in essence, is kind of 6 steps. The first one is kind of like talking about cyborgism. The second one is kind of the cyborg user manual. The third one is kind of things I think that are danger signs for like when we tell people how to behave and how not to behave. The last, the section 4 is where I thought Maria and I could maybe talk about some of our personal use cases and unpack some of those things. Section 5 was really important for me when speaking about neurodiversity and some of the things I've dealt with. So besides the panic disorder, I was diagnosed as obsessive compulsive in, oh my gosh, 1988. So was medicated from 1988 until almost 2010. So 22 years on medication for obsessive compulsive behavior. I've since then come to terms with a lot of autistic traits that I have, but we'll get more into that later. So I put some kind of coping skills in section 5. And then last but not least, some people just want the TLDR, just to tell me what to do. And I just put that in there in case you don't want to go through any of this. Does that sound good? Kind of the overview of what we're going to go through?
That sounds great. And yeah, let us know in the chat if there's something that you're just more curious about and you want us to dive into. Because I feel like any one of these sections is like, okay, Chris, I just need an hour with you to like deep dive into your brain to see how you see behaviors. Like behaviors itself is all just like one whole rabbit hole. So...
Yeah, I mean, the behavior section was really fun for me to create because I started documenting these back when those commercials came on between I'm on a Mac and I'm a PC. And It's funny because it's back. Right? The guy from I'm a Mac, I'm a PC back. But what I think is really important about this is kind of understanding that, when you think about the concept of cyborgs, basically what we're doing is we're acknowledging the role of technology in our lives. And cyborgs doesn't mean mechanical. It doesn't mean robotic. It just is an organism. The definition is literally just an organism that is enhanced by some sort of technology or feedback. A book can enhance you. Eyeglasses can enhance you. So I like the term cyborg because I think people need to get used to talking about it, especially now. If you're alive in 2020 and you think you're going to be alive in the next 10, 15, 20 years, you'll know a lot of cyborgs. You know a lot of them now, but I think it'll start to make more sense to you. But the behaviors, I think, for cyborgs are really interesting when I talk about behaviors and cyborgism, because if you look at this chart, really what it's showing you is we have this way starting back almost 15 years ago now, where we started to have a device identity. And, I think the Mac PC thing was probably the fastest way for people to kind of see that. But also, we had kind of the tribes of which chat messengers you're on. Slowly but surely, between 2006 and now, what we've seen is complete ecosystems of identity where these things are merging. We went from taking pictures of everything to filming everything to taking selfies of everything to like just capturing everything. And now we augment everything with our own images through lenses and filters and all of these types of super immersive behaviors. And I think what we need to realize is we are living in the 2020s in the first decade of fully realized cyborgs. Because in these 16 years, and people were born in these past 16 years, they don't know the difference, And I think it's really important to say that if we are cybernetic, as I believe, much more so than we're willing to admit, then we need to have really serious questions about kind of the interfaces that we deal with, because once you're cybernetic, you now are extended to your device. We need to talk about kind of your autonomy as a cyborg and then what that means for all of us. So any questions about the behaviors and kind of why I think that's an important first step to kind of recognize with cyborgism?
Yeah, let us know in the chat if there's anything you want us to dig into in a bit more detail. But I'm so curious about some of the pushback that you might get for people that are, afraid of kind of how deep we're kind of interconnecting with technology. What are some of the things you disagree with, or sort of do you get people kind of criticizing this idea that like, let's embrace our connectedness with technology?
No, I don't get a lot of let's embrace. I do get people who say, well, we shouldn't do it. And then that kind of always takes me to point two, which is, well, it's kind of too late. When I think about the last, at least for me, 50 years of technology, I lived through all of these times, and everything from punch cards to keyboards to touching our phones to putting stuff on our bodies to like physically slipping into clothing that have sensors in it. It's kind of eliminated. How do you get away from it? So many people live in homes that are full of technology, Amazon Alexas and smart lights and everything else. I mean, when I want to come to do a talk on camera nowadays, I literally, Alexa, turn off Showtime. I have all my stage lights linked to this, right? So, I really can't do a whole lot in my house. Alexa, turn on Showtime. I really can't do a whole lot in my house that isn't assisted in some way. Now, is it convenient? Yeah, but we can talk about tech convenience in a minute. But I think some of the pushback is we need to start to understand that the interfaces that we surround ourselves with this decade are disappearing, right? No one's walking around, glued to a smartphone in 2030. It's just not happening. And I think a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, and we're also addicted to our smartphones. I'm like, well, that's a very, very narrow view of the world. Do you understand what I'm saying when I talk about interfaces and why I think they're important to kind of this larger concept? All right. The next section is kind of super important to me, and that's this idea of autonomy. So many people today, Marie, when they use their devices or they ask a smart assistant for something, or they get something on their watch, or they order something from a store, those decisions are made for people. And people, I think, in a lot of ways, believe they have some autonomy in that. But oftentimes, like even Amazon will say to you, do you want to buy what you bought last time? You go to a restaurant where you ordered last time. You want to order what you ordered last time? You go to look for an app on your phone. You pull down to search. Do you want this app? Because it figures out the time of the day. And I think what's hard for me is a lot of people aren't thinking seriously about the role of autonomy in their lives. To that, so much so that I think a lot of anxiety and depression comes from a loss of autonomy. We just don't know how to describe that feeling of loneliness. It sometimes masks itself as loneliness because your direct role in your own decision making each day has a direct contribution to your overall mental health. And I think it's really important for people to think about that. So a lot of times I always say, if you can make your tech a little less convenient, you'll probably be a little happier.
I love that.
Yeah, because convenience is just grease for loneliness. And we just don't see it, and I've been connected to a lot of stuff, and I think it's really important people think about that. Last thing is kind of interesting, and I think it's really important, kind of like the hopeful message of kind of this cyborg section. And that's, we're really moving into like a profoundly important time. I mean, when you think about the internet as we remember it, from the 90s, 2000s, through the social networks, through kind of the support networks, through the creator networks. I think, Marie, you came up in the creator network space, right? And we're now heading toward this idea of mutual aid networks. And we're seeing more and more solutions, whether they're built on Notion or Airtable or any of these low no-code tools that are addressing specific population problems. That population might be a street, that population might be a city, that population be everybody struggling with long COVID. But this is a big deal, right? Because if you think about it through that lens, you realize we're no longer living in a world where, Maslow's hierarchy of need is dictating technology. So have a stranger come pick me up on a black car while I tell them to be quiet via the app. We're now looking at technology that's looking at all of us at once, right? The mRNA vaccines, right? Those were rolled out in a year after a decade's worth of study. And we still got pushback from, at least in the United States, I don't know in Canada, with the tracking app. So our phones could have let us know if we could have gotten back to normal a lot sooner had people not been so worried that your phone was tracking you. But at the same time, we'll use our phones to like give away every bit of privacy we have to skip a line for French fries. We won't let the government anonymously know where we are and if we'd been near someone who was infected. And it's just like, I just think we're in a time where BMI and IQ are starting to meet. And we've really got to get like provocative about helping people understand the difference between privacy and safety. If you're worried about privacy, that ship sailed a long time ago. If you're worried about safety, I'm going to get ranty on this, but so that's kind of why I think, before we get kind of into the neurodiversity of this, I kind of wanted to get into like Cyborg 101, because people have got to come to terms with, we're not dealing with ourselves or other people in the way we were 10 years ago. And it's only going to get more entrenched as we go forward this decade.
Yep. Yes. Sounds like there was some nuggets there, like Luthia saying, yeah, convenience is grief for loneliness was a big one there.
Grief for loneliness, yeah. I don't remember them. They fly out of my mouth. Sorry about that.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love the BMI meeting IQ, privacy versus safety, balancing act 2. Yeah. Lots of amazing conversations I can imagine are emerging as a result of this stuff. So yeah, let's keep going. I just love the way your brain, I also, again, I love how visual you are with this. Like your ability to break down your thoughts in a way that's visual and easy to understand is just next level.
That means so much to me, because like, again, this is like a big tip, if you're someone who is very visual, consider tools like Miro. There's a tool you use, Marie, I can't remember the name of it.
Whimsical. Mm-hmm.
Whimsical, Miro. There's lots of tools today. If you don't have those, just use PowerPoint. What I found, like, once I started not being constrained by words and just did pictures, my life changed. And I'm not an artist. I can't do anything, but I see outrageously complex patterns in linear fashion constantly. It's just like, I can't. I can go to the grocery store and see like the supply chain, like when I pick up a can. It's really weird. It's like some like, weird like process vision that I have. Yeah.
That is an incredible super skill.
So the Cyborg user manual, I kind of wanted to write because, we talked about mental health awareness. And I think now that we kind of said, okay, now that we have to identify as cyborg, like, okay, do you identify as cyborg? Act your pronouns, identify as machine. Then we need to, I'm serious. We need to kind of talk about like, how do we now merge our kind of physical responses to kind of our synthetic and artificial, environments. The first part of this was kind of this idea of neurology. And I think what's really important to remember when we're talking about our brains is it's more than just your brain. Your brain is like linked to your entire central nervous system, and your entire central nervous system and your brain actually work to control everything in your life. So there's something in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which actually is a timing gland, which tells your body when to do things, when to eat, when to rest, all these other types of things. And how you get information into your brain is actually mapped to kind of our evolution. Once you kind of get through the evolutionary point, you can actually see that the timing cues are mapped to that. Then you can start to see that if you actually map that over top of the evolution of humanity, you actually see there's also like a global brain happening also. But when you map on full-time, always-on technology, you start to have some of this stuff outsourced, like some of these mental and cognitive functions move into other systems. I'm not talking about AI or anything like that. We'll get deeper in this second. But just as kind of a starting point, you've got to understand that your brain is a giant time machine. That's all it's doing. And all emotions and all emotional regulation, dysregulation come from issues with that time machine. So most people like, jet lag. I'm like, well, it can be a little bit more than that. So that's kind of like brain 101. When we talk about neurodiversity, I think it's a super hot word right now. I'm noticing more and more people starting to use it. And when I wrote these definitions, I wrote them from my own point of view. So again, feel free to Google and create your own. But the varied ways our brains handle like all the sensory information we get, both coming in, coming out of us, can be completely influenced by more than just the circadian rhythm. They can be influenced by genetics, trauma, environments. For me, I'm very sensitive to light, sound, temperature, touch, tactiles. I have some genetic traits that are, I carry with me that predispose me to certain diseases. I'm one of these people that had done a lot of genetic testing. But more than anything, trauma. I mean, how you respond to what's going on in your life, and if it's been prolonged, can really show itself as trauma. And this trauma can start to manifest in certain types of traits. But to put it more simply, anybody who has like a like ability to function, we call those people neurotypical, right? But anybody who has different sets of sensory input and output routines, we call those people neurodivergent, or under the classification of neurodiversity. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
So the first thing I want to say about neurodiversity is there's two schools of thought. There's an older school of thought that people will pathologize neurodiversity. ADHD is a disease, or autism is a condition or a syndrome. I could go on and on and on with these. But there are also people who will kind of fetishize these things. I see my ADHD as a super skill. And I just want to be real clear that, again, let's try to avoid that human thing where we head toward polarity and camp. Because depending on what you are, it might work for you some days, it might not work for you some days. I remember when I was seeing my therapist, and I said to her, sometimes I'll be in a meeting or I'll be doing something and I'll be in front of people, and all of a sudden, like, I don't recognize my hands. I don't recognize my body. I spent 2 years having to look at genes on other people so I could see the size of the genes on them, so I could tell how big I was, because I knew what my size was in my memory, but I didn't know what my size was by looking. And she told me that this ability to disassociate was actually a skill that my body had learned when undergoing some trauma as a child, to kind of get me through the really dark parts. And that was when I became really interested in, is there some way I can take some of these skills that I've developed from neurodiversity and actually call them in when they would be useful, and ask them to go away when they're not. And that's when I really got into this whole idea, Marie, and I think what got me together with you today is like, how could we use these tools differently? Like, how could we create an exoskeleton or a scaffolding to bring our neurodiversity on or offline? Almost like an X-Man.
I love that. I love it so much. Yep.
So these are some really common sets of neurodiversity. Everybody, there's a much more complex, comprehensive list over here. There's a great chart that I found online that I think digs into this a lot better than I possibly could. But again, just, be considering it. The other thing I want people to think about too is, you might have neurodiverse traits. We'll talk about those in a second. But there's also nothing wrong with diagnosis and self-diagnosis. There's also a big schism right now with, is self-diagnosis valid? And as far as I'm concerned, that's between you and your doctor and whatever higher power you have. But for me and a lot of other people, self-diagnosis is completely valid. So don't get too caught up in that. When we go into the traits, I have this great photo I found I want to share with you. It's called Alice in Responsibility Land. You see Alice looking into the kitchen that she has, and she's an umbrella that says "put me away," and a door that says "lock me," and a little pastry that says "don't eat me," and a bottle of liquor says "don't drink me," and a pile of envelopes that say "pay us." And this is, I think, how a lot of neurodiverse, or what I would call uber responsible people see. And I think a lot of times, the whole need to create routines and productivity systems come from people who see the world this way. Because where it could look like a giant checklist, to a lot of other people, it looks like a system that has a misaligned time apparatus. I'm going to say that again. It could look like a giant checklist, but it could also look like a system of a misaligned time apparatus. Because when I see this, I don't see a checklist. I see timing functions. I see things that could have been done or not done, assisted or not assisted, in a different order that could have actually changed the output of the picture she's looking at. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yes.
So
Simone,
it's a great.
I don't know if you saw that. She's calling you an X-Man. You are an X-Man.
So I don't know what to do with that. But just be thinking about it, because I think it's one of these things. But let's talk about some of the traits of neurodivergent people. Time blindness is a big one. I think it's an even bigger one now for almost everyone in the world. I call it time collapse on Twitter. It's just being on a trigger on Twitter. I messed those up on purpose. To me, it's like so obvious that people have lost their sense of time. But at the same time, people have also developed a new sense. I believe we also have now a time sense, because some people can stand in line at the grocery store and know exactly to the moment. And we all have that friend that knows exactly how many minutes something has been. There's a very short distance between being 7 in the back seat saying how much longer, and being 41 going, it's been 31 minutes and 12 seconds. It's that the space between those two worlds is very, very small, but it happens for a lot of us. Insomnia is another big one, falling or maintaining sleep. Emphantasia, the inability to create pictures. I'm someone who is like hyper anti-emphantasia, so all I do is create pictures. Sensory overload, shame, rejection sensitivity is a big one. Hyper focused. But we're going to actually talk about some of these that I deal with personally. But did you have anything when you looked at these traits that really jumped out at you, Marie?
Oh, yeah. I mean, shame for sure, hyperfocus, sensory overload, masking. I didn't even know what masking was 2 months ago. And now I'm like, oh, that's why I was so exhausted and felt really shy or socially awkward. I was like, oh, I was just spending a lot of time just trying to be normal.
Yeah. And it's weird. I think I too went through a period. So being LGBTQAI, growing up, I masked early because, you have to deepen your voice. And you literally, in the 80s, at least I did, in the 80s and 90s, I used alternative pronouns, or I avoided using pronouns altogether, just because that was a tell, and it was easier. Actually, back then I called it passing. It was easier back then to pass. But gay people, we had a whole language for this. Like when you would see another gay person, you'd use phrases like, hey, and you're talking about someone else. Hey, is Joe a friend of Dorothy's? We had all these kind of coded language, everything from like how you referred to someone to like what color the hanky code was in the back of your pocket, so that we could live amongst, I think, the world, but still thrive. And I'm seeing a lot of neurodivergent communities are actually have these types of coded language now. And I think it's really important, because I think it's a great sign that no matter how much our technology starts to interface with our lives, I think the human condition will always be faster, at least in my experience.
Yeah. I love it.
And then the next section is kind of, it's kind of the middle section. So once you kind of get through the brain and, think about neurodiversity and traits, you kind of have to go into what I call the neurological theaters. And this is kind of like, where does your brain perform? Obviously, biologically, it performs in our bodies, it performs through our senses, and it performs through our behaviors. But cybernetically, it also performs. So if you have any type of smart wearable or AirPods, it's performing. You can adjust sound sensitivity, increase or decrease volume. You could literally put your AirPods in, leave your phone on a table, leave your phone on the table, walk to the bathroom, and you can hear like what's happening at the table. There's a ways that, cybernetically these devices extend your body, your kind of other body. But then when you think about just the types of functionality you have on a phone itself, there's so many ways that if you look at these quick functions, they actually are just settings for your senses. So your attention options, your audio options, your visual options. When you think about the camera, flashlight, magnifier, and screen recorder, what you're really looking at is a hyper set of skills augmenting your biological eyes and your sight sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I try to do is get people through this idea. And then of course at home, we talked about all this kind of smart stuff at home, but again, we don't think about home augmenting our behaviors, but a lot of time, and again, these things, if you haven't noticed, actually go in order across the top: bodies, wearables, experiences, senses, devices. Everything I do is kind of in actual order too. And then last but not least, I think that the neurological theater that a lot of us don't talk about is specifically experiences. We'll pathologize or we'll fetishize old age or young or youth. We'll pathologize or fetishize going outside. We'll pathologize or fetishize being inside. The pandemic has really kind of accentuated these last two. But I think when you start to think about neurodiversity, our brains, and kind of what the merger of our brains and our devices mean inside these theaters, you start to realize, wow, there's a lot we have to start to be careful for in these digital cybernetic spaces. And that's when we get into these triggers. So I'm going to dive into these triggers because I think it's just super fascinating that we start to kind of like talk about this stuff out loud. So the first one is what I call reaction space. And if you think about technology over the last 30 years, it originally was built for interaction. It was even this thing called interaction design. But then like in the 2010s, we kind of moved to this idea of engagement over interaction. And then over the last decade, we've moved away from engagement into reactions. So you'll notice all of the tools we use now have reaction triggers. And the one thing I have found is depending on the space you're in, the limitation of reactions actually can have a profound effect on your mood. So even if you don't have a rich set of emotions by default, some people just are kind of more flat with their emotions, they're still forced to like pick 5, and that 5 can be overwhelming, right? So I always tell folks, especially folks who come to me for advice, and like, I'm really struggling with this. I'm like, do yourself a favor and like try not to react. Like you could type something, but try not to interact. Or if you need a reaction, go meme, right? Go GIF. But forcing yourself in these reaction boxes, if you could see your reactions like Mark Zuckerberg, you'd probably think about Facebook differently, right? And I think it's really telling that, they call, Twitter the dumpster fire of social media. Well, that's because you can only do 2 things. Like you can say, I'm going to save this stuff to stalk someone, or I can tell someone I love them. And that's it. There's just not a whole lot more you can do. So that's reaction space. I think reaction space is super important one for people to start to think about. Actually, really be careful with that. Time collapse is kind of the biggest one. We talked about this earlier, time blindness, but our apps are actually tied to what I call temporal signatures. So a lot of the apps that make me anxious are the ones that are really about things that are going to go away very soon. So security passcodes, Snapchats, videos that are temporary, they make me super anxious because like I can never find the pause button to understand what's going on. But like apps that really focus on very long periods of time. So apps around planning, apps around legacy, those things actually make me a lot more calm than kind of apps that are more focused on the now. So kind of the now are kind of the things like Netflix, Uber, anything that to do with like using a piece of technology, like get me something right this moment. But what you'll find is if you start to think about those technologies and their temporal signatures through the lens of your emotions, you'll see why some days are harder for people than others.
And what are the ones for you that, yeah.
The big ones are the temporary. I mean, the temporary is a huge thing for me. I mean, I can't tell you how much having a countdown or having something pass before me stresses me out. A lot of times when I'm listening to music, Netflix, Uber, any of these things are, that are live in kind of this specific space for like demand services make me super impatient. The more I use those, the less less nice of a person I am. You know, anything about the recent or the soon makes me super indifferent. Like, I just don't care. It's just like another thing to happen. So for me, but like doing things from the past or doing things in the forgotten are actually make me super, super calm. That's why I think a lot of productivity tools are so peaceful for people, because what they're doing is they're just time traveling to the very far future at the same time they're reflecting on the very far past. You know, productivity at its heart is nothing more than a DeLorean going 88 miles per hour to someplace you decided was important.
I love that.
Right. But we don't talk about it, I think, through that lens in so many ways, you know, like, oh, all these things are going to get done. Those are all things you want to get done. And that's a great thing, because now you're seeing yourself in the, I'm going to go into my productivity spiel, but does this kind of have a little bit of a coalescence with you when I say this idea of time collapse and thinking about your technology?
Yes, but I do also want to acknowledge, I think you see this stuff in such a uniquely fascinating way that I don't think is second nature to other folks. Like, I think it's just really interesting to hear it articulated this way. So I think you see this, like, you see things in images, like, this is so easy for you. And I think it's just so wonderful to see it articulated like this. I'm like, wow, I never thought about it in that way, but I really like how you
again, take a screenshot. And I always say, put your apps in folders around the time, the past, the recent, the milestones, the now, the temporary, the soon, the future. Really put them in folders, and you'll find days you're less happy, you're in those apps that are making you tied to that mood. It's 100%. Like, everyone, I do a lot of workshops all over the world for big companies, and every single one, I get hundreds of letters like, you changed my life. I'm like, no, I just readjusted your clock.
Well, I think that's what's really interesting too, is I think we tend to think of certain apps as being like, oh, Instagram stresses me out because influencers, or, oh, Twitter stresses me out because, but when you think about it from a time perspective, not just the app itself, like, what's actually happening about that? Why is that giving you anxiety? I think that's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah. And some parts of Instagram don't give you anxiety, right? So going back and flicking through your own old posts, in Instagram, looking at a partner's old posts, those types of things aren't anxiety provoking. Looking at a block list in social media is. Like, I think if they should revamp blocking and make it like you should be blocked from your own blocking, because like looking at a block list is nothing more than reliving trauma. Right. But, you know, no one's going to tell you that. The next one's kind of it's a really big pet peeve of mine. I'll just start by saying my husband is blocked on all social media. He can't see anything I post. I had him block me too, because I don't want him seeing anything I post. And that's just the idea that technology has flattened out our relationships, creating what I call intimacy collapse. And intimacy is really how we deal with time-based emotions when it comes to love, whether it be our families, our careers, everything else. Because of this flattening, what we've done with a lot of our relationships is we've actually made them like DVRs, right? So like Facebook was a huge thing when it first happened in the early 2000s, because suddenly all the time we didn't have to see our friends was manageable, because we could not see our friends and then have some time to kind of binge watch before we spoke to them. But unfortunately, kind of that cult of asynchronous friendship spilled over into asynchronous relationships at work, asynchronous thoughts online, asynchronous, you know, music listening. Like, you didn't listen to music with your friends anymore. You saw what they were listening to, you saw what you were listening to, and there was different times they were happening in. You know, asynchronous hobbies, Instagram, you know, asynchronous kind of experiences, Snapchat, and then Snapchat tied those asynchronous experiences to places on a map. So you then could not only see your friends, but you could troll around on a map and see all the asynchronous experiences in other places. But then going up, you know, you got, you know, the rise of dating apps, and then the rise of fitness apps, and these other things. So what I try to tell people is, when you think about kind of your apps that involve relationships with other people, first, be aware of the stress that asynchronous relationships cause. When you can pick up or call someone, or see someone in person if the pandemic is in a better place in your area, or if you're in the far future. I don't know what's happening then. Actually, I do, but that's a whole other story. But more than anything else, create an intimacy stack. This is another thing I talk about in kind of a lot of my workshops. Like, put your apps kind of in the order in which you would want to meet, fall in love, and grow old with someone. And that's what you're seeing here on the screen. This is kind of like my preferred way to have a relationship with anyone online. But unfortunately, a lot of people just say, I love everything you do, so I'm going to find you everywhere. That looks really creepy. Right? And I just think, I can't tell you how many people try to friend me on 23andMe. I'm like, oh my gosh, you should know whether I own a cat before you know if I'm going to die of heart disease. There's just an order of things that we're avoiding because the relationships are flat, right? And I'm all about like, let's unflatten these relationships through technology. So that's a big one. And also I think the other biggest thing about all this, as far as neurodiversity, is I think a lot of masking happens in these technology unflattened stacks. I don't want to go there. And the last one is a big one, and I know it's probably a big one for you because of what I've seen stuff you do in Notion, and that's item splintering. So just like I said, when I said relationships are flattened, and I said, kind of emotions are flattened and time is flattened, objects themselves are flattened. And when you think about an object, whether it be, a set of headphones you might have bought, right? That one thing could have been linked to a task, but now it could be linked to a task in the future. It could be linked to a company. It could be linked to a specific person. It could be linked to an account you bought it on. This idea of item splintering is just so important, I think, for people to start to think about, because a lot of times when you go to find something, like if you've ever tried to find something in Notion or Airtable, I think a lot of people struggle, and a lot of productivity systems end up saying, well, how do I organize everything? But they don't say why. The why behind the need to organize everything is the idea that when you think about a headset, are you thinking about the receipt? Are you thinking about the day? Are you thinking about the person you're with when you bought them? Are you thinking about where they are right now? Are you thinking about their battery charge? Are you thinking about their insurance status? Are you thinking about the next time you need them? So item splintering is a huge situation. And I think, again, how we use these tools could be a big aid in doing that. Any questions on the Cyborg Handbook?
I mean, I just love talking about this stuff and hearing your perspective on it. But yeah, if anyone has any specific questions or things you want Chris to go deeper into, let us know in the chat. This is like just so nerdy and amazing. I'm like, oh, now I need to make a Notion Cyborg user manual.
Right? Oh my gosh, I'd love to collab on that. Yeah.
Let's do it.
I was very influenced by someone named Amber Case. She's my cyborg godmother. In 2010, she had a TED talk called "We Are All Cyborgs Now." It's one of my favorites. So with all that being said, I think there are three things that are happening in the world today that are kind of big gotchas if you want to come out of your cyborg closet. The first one is connection phobia. Connection phobia is, this idea that people tell you need to have a digital Sabbath or you need to come offline. I think connection phobia can be a real trigger for a lot of people. I can't tell you how many people I see on Twitter or on Facebook and other places to go, but so-and-so has so many followers, or so-and-so, did this, or so-and-so is followed by this person, or so-and-so. And it's just like that kind of creating this hype around the metrics of your attention is going to actually ruin it. And I use a tool that actually removes vanity metrics. I'll show it to you in a little bit, but I think it's really important that we just kind of get over connection phobia, because I think at the end in the final analysis of this period of time, we'll see that it wasn't the connections that were hurting us. It was how we were viewing those connections. And it reminds me the one time my husband and I we'd just met, and he'd been sending me selfies for a month or so. And, he's a really handsome guy. And I just remember saying, why do you keep sending me all these selfies? And, he was like, it takes me so long to make them. And I said, make what? It's just a picture. Like, I was thinking, am I just dating the world's biggest narcissist? Like, what is that all about? And he said, let me see the last one. No, let me see the one before that. It was really good. So I handed him my phone. He said, look, and he pulls with the phone and he presses it. And it was a live photo. I didn't even think that they were live photos. But in the last month of our relationship, he'd been sending me live photos where the keyframe was just him smiling like a selfie. But if I'd played it, at the end, he was holding up notes that said, I love you, or kissing or blowing kisses. And at that moment, I realized, oh my gosh, I had judged this guy's attention. I had judged his brain. I had judged his heart. And all the time he was creating these elaborate technological love letters to me. And that's just so important that we we talk about that. And I don't know. So avoid connection phobia. Hyperproductivity is another one I think that gets that can be a danger zone. I see a lot of people in different Facebook groups who were just moving from framework to process to influencer, framework to process to influencer, back and forth. And I think at the end of the day, if productivity is kind of masking kind of some emotions, and that's kind of why we're talking today, is like, what are the ways you deal with your emotions as it relates to productivity? And I know Marie, you showed some stuff with me. You're going to show me in the next section that I just was so so important for people to talk about. But yeah, just, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's like, I love everybody being hobbies, but just having hobbies, but just be careful, because if you find yourself looking for another tool, you probably just have a feeling you don't know how to recognize. I'm gonna say that again. If you find yourself looking for another tool, you probably have a feeling you just don't recognize. There's no difference between feelings and processes. Processes are external manifestations of internal feelings.
It's like we manage our anxiety by managing our tools, right?
Yep. And last but not least, wizards and gurus, which is interesting because here I am asking Maria to talk to me. But there are a lot of people I've followed over the years. You know, Tim Ferriss, I think, was kind of one of the bigger. David Allen was another big one. Tiago Forte is a big one. There's a lot of people who are kind of, you know, with millions and millions of followers who are trying to teach people, you know, a day in my life as a minimalist. You know, at some point, you know, enjoy your life. You know, and if this is reality TV for you, then just realize productivity reality TV might mean like a whole nother thing. You need to think about your feelings. But, and I always like to tell people there's a bit between a thought leader and actual dopamine. So just be careful with that one. But, you know, this whole talk, you know, took us a long time to get here, was really about you and I talking about the different things we do to manage our kind of feelings. So do you want to talk a little bit about your systems? And I'll share some of my like hyperconnectivity systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have a lot of similarities in our systems, and I think that's why we were kind of, you know, drawn to one another. You were probably seeing in my tour, like, oh, it's so similar in a way to what you're trying to do in Airtable. So, you know, for me, Notion's kind of started as a place where I was tracking my feelings every day. I was tracking my observations. I was looking at patterns, right? And I think you and I are probably drawn or like think in patterns and big pictures and see connections. And so I wanted to see over time, like, why do I keep feeling overwhelmed, or why am I overbooking myself, or what are those behaviors about myself that I don't like or that I want to change? What are the when am I at my best, and how can I kind of recreate the conditions for success when I have an amazing day and I feel so in the zone? How can I? It's like I wanted to understand like what was the language happening underneath, and to give it more context. So, you know, I've been just experimenting with these different modes of like in Notion, I created so many dashboards for what's my vibe today, or like, what's my energetic capacity today, right? And I think that's why, again, you were drawn to some of the stuff I was doing, is like, you know, working based on mood, working based on context, just giving myself options so that if I want to jump into the health and wellness section, I can. If I want to be in focus mode, I can do that. If I want to connect with people deeper, I have a connection board for that. And I just started creating these spaces that kind of gave me an ability to move more fluidly throughout my space and just really notice my own behavior, and building in that reflection to, like you said, notice things where, what was I doing on that day that I felt really disconnected or overwhelmed or whatever. So if I want to feel more connection and I want to feel more flow, what's happening there? What days of the week is that happening the most often? And who are the people that are actually feeding me and energizing me? And when do I find myself getting really, really depleted? So that information, and the more that you feed the system, right, you gain way more insight. So you're kind of incentivized to keep feeding the beast in a way. And it's just been really, for me, it's been like kind of a magical process to see your behavior over time in this data, like both qualitative and quantitative working together. And I sort of felt like I would hear people really heavily criticizing, like, oh, all you productivity idiots, you know, always talking about your tool, you know, just getting really upset about it. Like, why don't people just like get back to work? I was like, well, I'm not just looking at Notion as a tool for getting work done. And so if you only look at it through the lens of a to-do list or productivity tool, you're looking at it through a very, very limited perspective. And so, I see it as a tool for creativity. I see it as a tool for reflection. I see it as a tool for just bringing more awareness. It's a tool for meditation. That's how I've been using it, and it's improved my life. And it's like, you can't really argue with that, right?
The first person subjective experience is, I think, where it's at. You know, it's just like, you know, so many people are, you know, who want to talk to me about Airtable. You know, I don't think they really care about my Airtable. They care about my life. You know, one of the most powerful things I learned in my 40s was, you know, there are two types of people in the world: people who want to be you and people who want to be with you. Ooh. I'll say that again. There are two types of people in the world: people who want to be you and people who want to be with you. And making sure that you have a healthy balance in your life and you're with people who actually want to be with you. And there's nothing wrong with it. With, you know, there are a lot of people I want to be, but I try not to hang out with them a whole lot because it's not healthy for me. And I think it's really super important that we talk about this and just kind of acknowledge that. I actually was going to do like a little demo of my little, I have 3 main systems I wanted to show you. Do you care if I just do that?
Yes. Oh, please do. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to stop the screen share for a second and then kind of roll through these 3 sections for you real quick before I dive into them. Cause I'll do this whole demo in less than 10 minutes. You'll be like, that was the craziest 10 minutes. It'll be the 10 minutes everybody wants to go back and watch. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my whole screen. So guys, I have a super wide monitor. I'm going to do it for 1 second. So don't worry, it'll be visible here in a minute, but I just want to give you an idea of like how my day functions. So I have a 49-inch monitor. It's super wide just because for me, it's easier to have my life kind of visible at once. Here's the chart we're dealing with today. And we're going to be going over my section here, by the way. We'll talk about that in a second. But this first monitor is everything to do with my productivity, what I have to do each day. The second screen is my spiritual stuff. Did the screen sharing switch when I moved to the second screen?
Yep.
Okay. And the third screen is anything to do with my community. So it's really how I manage kind of my brain, my heart, and my world, because I also manage my local community all through Airtable. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in now to my actual Airtable so we can get into the nitty gritty so we can talk about some of these things. Yeah, so get ready. So my Airtable, Airtable, for those of you who don't know, Airtable is just a big database. I think Notion and Airtable are pretty interchangeable. Notion has a better front end, as I would say. But these things are bases. Each base can have a bunch of information in it. If you've never seen Airtable, it's pretty straightforward. For me, I think it's important that you have a visualization of your base. So like, what would your visualization of your Notion be if you could draw a picture? So this is the picture of my Airtable. It's broken up into these different tables that we'll see here in a second, but those tables sit inside sections in my life. Does that make sense before I kind of speed through this? So when I think about these sections, they actually kind of go in an order when I think about how I want to experience my life, like in time. So there's what I call my values, my money, my assets, my health, my business, and my maker stuff. So let's just get going with the whole system. So this is Airtable 101. This is what I call my wizard panel. This allows me to see the different sections of my life and jump into there very, very quickly. After my wizard table, we get into like where the work begins. So my Airtable starts with what I call entities, and it's basically everything that's super important in my life and the ability to search across all the bases at once and see it in a snapshot. So if I want to see myself, my spouse, our pets, or my companies, this is the first place I go to look. Everything then is from this point forward is linked back to this. That's really important for you guys to remember, is like everything from this point forward is linked back to each entity. But I didn't want to create a base that was all about what I had to do. I wanted to create a base all about what I valued, right? So when I think about what I valued, it looks like this. So my spouse and I sat down, or before I met my spouse, I sat down, I thought about what are the things that I value, what are the guardrails, and how do they function? So when we say this, we actually took time to actually map those things out. What do they mean for you? What do they mean for me? It also ties to a larger map of values around the world where we can zoom in to specific things and see the values that were expressed in different times in different places around the world. So for example, my health is how I treat myself. My home is how I treat my spouse and other people who are like home to me. Family is how I treat peers and friends that are very close. Work is what I do for the people that pay me money. Money is what I do with money, and service is what I do for when all of those things kind of line up. All of that sits behind another integration into Miro, where my spouse, my friends, and I will have working sessions weekly where we talk about where we met or didn't meet our values. And we create little stickies and we kind of review them and we share them with each other.
This is a collaborative activity that you do with your partner and friends?
Yep. Every week.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And we had to introduce a feeling picker because some people, once I teach people to do work with values, then it was hard. Because again, you should never have a friend that doesn't share your values. Like, they're not friends. Like, they're Facebook people. I don't know. Come on, people. It's not hard. All right. Next thing was the next table is this idea of timeline. So timeline for me is really important because when you think about all of the connections you have in life, they live inside these containers. So for instance, like here's all the decades of my life. If I wanted to come in here and see how old I was, where I lived, how big that house was, what was that house like to live in. A lot of times, if you could see your values with how they connect back to kind of where you come from, and create a system. So I have a whole system for my friends or my spouse or anyone in my family can create what's called a memory of love. They can post these memories. So think of it as a kind of a heart genealogy that you and anyone you know can start to post things to, because it asks them for a date and a place, etc., and gives them lookups and everything else. They can come in here and just like do this. And it's a web form. So it's super simple. Is this interesting, by the way? I don't want to go too fast.
Yes, and a question just popped in that I'd love for you to give your perspective on, which is how did you identify your values? What questions did you ask yourself, and have your values changed over time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is something I really want to collaborate with Marie on. So if you guys can bug Marie, I created a values form where I basically defined kind of how to think about our values. But for me, when I looked at my values, there are a couple things going on. First, values are kind of fundamental to life. So, and they usually don't change, but maybe once generationally or when some type of trauma or traumatic event happens, can rearrange your values. We've all seen this, right? Moving can rearrange your values. So I think it's important once you kind of define your values to that person's questions, and I'll talk about, I think this question is how did you define them? You then have to think about the order. But defining your values is not as hard as you think. So when you think about your life and kind of your whole life, like right now you might be anxious, right now you might be depressed, right now you might be in a successful period, right now you might be in a less successful period. We all go through these periods, right? Regardless of those temporal markers, you've always behaved the same way. Think of intuition as your values whispering. I'm going to say that one more time. Think of intuition as your values whispering, because there are certain things you know intrinsically. Those are literally values. Right. So for me, I know intrinsically, although I ignored it for decades, I probably should exercise. I knew intrinsically for decades, I probably should eat vegetables, but I didn't have anything green in my mouth until I was 42. I'm 53. I'd never ate a vegetable till I was 42. Like my vegetable list was corn. Right. So, I was one of those kids, like super picky eater. But again, that's neurodiversity. I have a very weird texture problem when I eat certain types of food. So, if you're thinking about your values, first, just write down the words that come to your head. And then next, once you kind of think about the words, screenshot mine, use mine. I don't care. Like, the thing is like, just define them. But the most important thing you do when you define your values is like, give them a summary. Like say, what do you mean by health? So health values are defined as the state of behavior as it relates to the optimal mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, financial health, right? That's a lot, right? But like, what does that mean? So then, you go on and say, what does that actually mean to value health? So we actually go on to define the kind of bullet points that we meant. So what is spiritual health? So for me, it's the ability to practice being uncomfortable with uncertainty. That to me is spiritual health. The ability to practice being uncomfortable with uncertainty. Right? It's not a number of reps. It's like how comfortable was I with everything going wrong. So I think there's probably more we could do. Again, you got actions in here too, right? So actions have to come with values. Once you to kind of define them, give them a summary and what they mean, you actually say, well, what does that mean? Like, what are the actions you take to maintain your values? And a lot of times you'll see these actions tied to like a to-do list or something. But really what you're saying when you tie actions, like kind of health actions to a task list, is you're saying, I value these things. So why not just make them a value to start with? And this is hard because I think a lot of times all great systems I've ever seen kind of roll up at a level below this. They roll up at goals or projects, but oh well. I hope that answers your question, Marlon Brando. I think it was Marlon Brando. I don't remember. But again, we're back on timeline. So timeline is kind of the place that I live. But what I love about timeline is it also gives you this great view to go back and search your entire life to find something kind of really interesting. The next section is goals. A lot of people have goals. Again, I love talking about goals. Everyone loves talking about goals, but like I'm trying to be super realistic with my goals. So they always are done at the end or beginning of the year before and have a deadline. And then those goals are kind of tagged to the projects that support those goals. So in this case, I went from goals to the projects that support those goals to the tasks that support those projects and goals. So to me, it's like a 3-level hierarchy. It super works for me. So this is like my task list. This is the one for today. For me, tasks are really simple. I see a lot of people talk about task and productivity, but again, you can see right away, this task is tied to me and it's tied to my value of home, right? So if I wanted to see specifically how much time I spent, how much money I spent, or how many relationships I had based by value, that's something I can do. And this is the difference, I think, between productivity and valuativity. I don't even know if it's a word, but I call it valuativity.
You heard it right here, folks.
Valuativity, yeah. Interactions is just how all those things work together, right? So, anytime I talk to anyone, if it's an email, if it's a phone call, it gets logged. These logs are automated through integrations to calendar, phone calls, screenshots. I've got a lot of really cool automation. But what this does is allows me to come back here and look for something. One of the things I really love about these types of logs are accountability views. So like my CPA is always saying she didn't remember or she did remember. So I literally created a CPA log, which is then tied to a view on my website that my CPA can log into so she can see what she did and what she didn't do. So this is a public view hidden behind a log password on my website that my CPA can come in and send me information, but see what we've talked about and get the information she needs. So it's really about taking your productivity or your values and then extending them out so that it can be interfaced with the rest of the world. I also have a front end for my doctor. My actual physician has a front end to the same another log, another site. Because again, it's like he needs to know what's going on with me and how I'm doing.
You're actually making other people's lives easier by you providing that information, right?
Yeah.
Like wasted time finding notes and all that good stuff.
It's really strange that there's like a portal for the electric company, but not a portal for your mother-in-law. Like there really should be. Right? It's just like, why is it easier to pay your electric bill than interface with your mother-in-law? Hold on.
Can I jump in with the question from Simone about, don't you find that goalposts change during the year? The project context perhaps shifts during that time period. So how do you deal with the moving?
Yeah. So for me, I won't set a goal that's not achievable in that year. It'll just be it just won't exist. It'll just be a task. It'll just be like a thing. Again, to me, goals have to exist inside the nomenclature of goal, project, task. So if something happens, you have a major life change that's going to change the goal. Well, what you actually had, remember what we said about major life changes are changes in priority, changes in values, right? So again, so now you've got a value change. So like it would be, I think, if you made like health from number 2 to number 1, maybe you have to work on your relationship with your family. So you make, family number the second priority. So they do move, but like I've been really successful at not kind of having projects and tasks and goals that move around, just because I just try to be more realistic. Organizations.
Well, you've honed your system over years and years and years, right? So I think, for Simone, for example, it's good to just notice you find yourself changing your goals quite a bit. It's possible that you just haven't really done the work to maybe really deepen into like what those values are. And are you just putting projects on your plate that like are not actually supporting your goals? So I think that takes time to notice those gaps and be like, wait a second, is this kind of out of alignment? So I think you're already at like super level with your alignment. And I think it's just good to acknowledge it. It might take a bit of time to. But
I think if you've got a goal and it's rolled up to a value, you're going to have a harder time creating. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'd love people to give me the feedback, what their thing is. Again, if you come through the lens of values to start, everything actually makes a lot more sense, because you could have a goal, but if it's not aligned to one of your values, the problem is people try to force fit goals into their values. And like, you'll know the minute it's like an uncomfortable shoe, like, okay, I want a new kitchen, so I'm gonna remodel the kitchen, but I have a value of home, so that should go in there. No, that is a garish abuse of values, and anybody else would tell you that, and you know that, but you value that because truth and honesty is part of your communication values, right? So it's just like, but I completely agree. I mean, it's fun to do goals and things like that at the beginning of the year. I mean, New Year's resolutions are a huge thing. But if we think about this through entities, to make sure I do this bridge. If you think about entities, values, timeline, goals, projects, tasks, interactions, they kind of all live in this roll up to like how you get to this next level, right? So how do you get beyond that? And that's where you start to get into this idea of people and orgs. But I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to check in on Marl Brando's question again, too. Like, how do you prevent diluting yourself of what you value, such as a bad relationship, for example? I'm very curious your thoughts on like deluding yourself about what you value.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between what you value and values. Right. So I can value, these AirPods have a value. I can value them, but are they part of my values? So yes, they have a value. They were $150. Do I value them? Yes, they make life easier. So much so I had to color code them because I can never tell which ones I'm using. But are they part of my values? No. Now, if I was hard of hearing and they actually helped augment my hearing, they would be. Right. So to me, I think the deluding yourself is a super slippery slope. And someone who understands that they would delude themselves is probably a lot further along than most people. Let's be honest. So Marlon Brando probably is like super on point with this. But also try not to be your own worst skeptic. It's one thing to be your own worst enemy. It's another thing to be your own worst skeptic. And I've been both. And I think you have to believe enough of your own imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is real, but they're also real imposters. I've never met an imposter who had imposter syndrome, and I've never met an imposter syndrome sufferer who was an imposter. So, if you're worried that you're going to be deluded or something like that, I think try not to stress about it too much. And just be careful. Again, values are things. I've got this great chart that we have in our drawing here that I created for someone else, but values literally live inside this time paradox of generational things. So there are certain beliefs that you should have that have lasted, decades. Those are literally your values. Like I said, it was the whispering of your intuition. Goals are things that last year or yearly. So also try to think about these concepts through the lens of time. Because once you remove kind of the intent and replace it with time, intention takes care of itself. So a lot of times with all of these tools, our big thing is to put a date on something, right? But that's not actually looking at the temporal intention. So a project is something you're going to think about for the next 3 to 4 months. But maybe you could have a project status or a project class of thinking or doing, right? So just because it's a project doesn't mean it has to get done. Right? A project is a time frame. It's a 3 to 4 month span of time you're going to spend on something. So one of the reasons I'm a pagan is because I love seasons. Seasons are 3 months. Seasons are the original project management, right? Moon cycles are a month, right? So I'm probably getting too far down a rabbit hole, but
I love it.
yeah. Thinking about that. So organization is kind of the next stop where I track the people that I interface with. After organizations, I've got the people that I deal with, and those are just in groups, whether they be family, friends, etc. Beyond that, I've got kind of everything that rolls into the accounts that I use to manage my money. All of those accounts then roll up into my bills. And what I like about bills is, bills allows you then to say, if you've got a specific bill, does it go toward a specific value, and is it worth it? So for example, my spouse has this bill coming up. It's $120 a year. It's for this membership. And I said to him, hey, this bill's coming up next month. Is it something you're actually actively getting value from? And he said, no, let's get rid of it. We got rid of it. Transactions are basically how the money all flows back into the system. Documents are basically all the important pieces of paper you need to manage your life. Those important pieces of papers with those transactions and bills, money, people and stuff roll up to your assets in your life. Your assets roll back down to the values you had. Those assets live in places in your world. Those places also are virtual. We just call virtual places apps. They also hold assets. Once you kind of get through apps and places and things, you kind of then get into this concept of health, right? So you have to start looking at your health through the same lens, right? So what are the surgeries you've had versus the procedures versus how you're feeling? A lot of times, especially nowadays, it's really important that people start to kind of manage and think about their own relationship with their body. Here's the health portal for my physician, but it's also for my family, so we can see all of our important health information. And then I've got, like everyone else, I've got customers. I've got customers I've worked with in the past, customers I'm working with now, and customers that are prospects of mine. Outside of that, everything from before this point actually sat outside of like what I do for a living. But what I do for a living is I do workshops and sell consulting to everyone from Bear to Google. That sits behind the most important thing, which is the recommendations that comes from those people. And then finally, all of that sits behind my publicly facing website. So you'll see the different sections on my website here. If you ever go there, link back to, so here's the publicly section. Those sections link back to all the way back down to my values. And then I recently created something called the Habit Store that allows me to kind of share things I use that help me with specific feelings. So for example, if I'm feeling anxious, I've got a tool directory that'll come in here and let me see what types of tools can help me deal with anxiety today. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how I'll deal with my productivity. And when I think about like my functioning day to day, it looks like a lot, but I'll be honest with you, between me, my friends, and my professionals and my family, we all interface with it. Wow. And it's not as overwhelming as I think. I think a lot of times, a lot of these tools, and Marie, you help people master Notion, right? I think some of the challenge people have is like just being overwhelmed with the amount of work it has to do. And they don't think about the amount of collaboration you could do with your family, with your kids, with your doctor, we just had to get new insurance. I just sent a view to a table to the agent, so
handy. Yeah. It's like, how can we use this stuff to, make our lives easier and better? And I'm sure it's very intimidating from the outside just to look at a very, very complete and thorough system like that. But I think just starting, right? Like, don't worry about like tracking all of the stuff in the past yet and like pulling in old stuff. Like, just start today with some of this tracking, right? You're not going to go 0 to 60 overnight, but I think when you start to kind of, it's like, where would you tell people to start? Looking at that, being like, holy crap, this is incredible, but like, how do I begin?
I think whether it's Notion or Airtable or anything, you start with where I started, and that's you start with what I call the entity table, right? You have to define who you are. And I always tell people, just create a virtual driver's license, like, in case of emergency, page. That's actually how my Notion started, like 3 years or 4 years ago. I don't know how long ago it was I created it just in case of emergency. Once you do that, I think values is really important. But again, I think if you don't have a values questionnaire, maybe I'll just create one. I've got the one I use, I share it with my friends and things all the time, but maybe that will be a big thing. And that's enough, so many people like want to build these massive systems, but like, that's really enough. My system is in that order because I believe if you build the system in that order, the order I've built it in, you can't lose, right? Because you made the most important thing yourself and your family. You made the second most important thing is how you spend your time, right? You made the third most important thing kind of then how you interface with the world before you even got to like worrying about, do you have a business?
Love that.
Cool.
Yeah, Dean saying,
go ahead.
Oh, just Dean saying, trying to figure this out in Notion. It's so helpful to see something this deep and wide. Yeah, exactly. And again, I think my setup is so similar to yours in like tasks, rolling up to projects, rolling up to goals, rolling up to values. So I think there's actually, it's not a coincidence in a way that we've recreated very similar systems in our different tools.
It's like cybernetic DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's the reason I talk about cyborg so much, is because we all have the same tools to express our hearts and minds. So there's going to be a genetic, a silicon genetic link between us, Yeah. The other system I want to show you, which is kind of, it's not as deep as that one, but I think it's a lot more fun, is my care table. So that's my dare table. This is my care table. Am I sharing the right screen?
So yeah. Wow.
Okay. So my care table basically has kind of all the kind of the metrics of kind of who I am, and not really the values, but kind of from me upward. It's where I do a lot of my mood logging. I also log my emotions in my care table. So I try to keep my heart and my mind separate. So my dare table, the thing I just showed you, is kind of like my mind, and my heart is my care table. And that's really dealing more with like how I'm feeling, kind of my subjective experience, where Airtable is my objective experience. But what's really great about it, and Marie and I were comparing notes last night, is like I have an emotion picker because I love logging feelings, but feelings are hard to identify. I've noticed a lot of my friends and family have trouble actually. So what I did was I created a feelings picker where I indexed like every possible feeling, and you could just start to type in some words. And when you find a feeling, you can go ahead and select it. And then if that feeling is actually tied to crystals or chakras, I actually does an autofill to pull up like what crystals you should use and what chakras, and it tells you how to do it, which I just think is so much fun. And then also I'm a practicing techno-pagan. So I built a tarot card picker. So every day it picks a tarot card for me and then links me to a video where I can go and learn about that particular tarot card in under 3 minutes. And then each day I take time to do an inspiration, a reflection, an intention, a protection, an affirmation, a reflection, and a gratitude, and then close the day. But what I love about it is all of this data sits inside the actual day length. So every day has like a certain amount of hours because there's the sunrise and sunset. But then each day length sits inside of a moon cycle. Each moon cycle sits inside of a pagan Sabbath. Each Sabbath sits inside of spring, or season. Each season sits inside of an astrological season, and each one of those sits inside of a Chinese zodiac year. And it's really cool when you think about it because this allows you to see kind of your life linked and your moods and things linked to stuff that's actually out of your control. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about feelings and mood logging, it's so easy to say, okay, this is tied to like this person, but it's so much easier to blame a bad day on the moon than your wife, right? So, I always tell people like, before you point the finger at someone else, look at the stars, right? Because there's probably it's probably a lot easier to divorce the sun than it is your
There was a full moon. It's not my fault. I was acting a little
right. And then it all has this great calendar system that I can come in here and see, because we're getting ready to come up on a retrograde. I've got great charts so I can see basically how my mood is going over time in the evening and that. And then also, just like everything else, it ties to a Miro board that my family and friends and I take time to do our moon cycle and seasonal cycle intention settings. So we take time to write down the important things that we want to focus on. So the projects and goals and tasks are great, but intentions are wicked, right? So intentions are kind of where your intuition and your heart leads you. It's kind of the magic of you, right? And then you take time at the end of that season to actually kind of write down what happened. But again, it's one of these wonderfully exciting, maybe wildly bizarre systems that help me really think about how my life was not just connected to all the things I wanted to line up, but connected to like everything above me when it comes to like the world outside.
Yeah, because connected to the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Was that fun? Did you like that?
Oh yeah, like I'm seeing people say like, this is the stuff I enjoy most. Absolutely amazing. So glad I stumbled upon this on Twitter. Genius. How did you build that random card picker?
The random card picker is in Airtable. There's an app called it's a flashcard viewer, so it just randomly picks them for you. It basically wants you to guess the name, but it also picks you a random card, so it's kind of fun to do.
Oh, I just love it. Yeah, like every time I see you show your setup, I see similarities in mine where I'm like, oh, I could add an image to that. That would make it so much more interesting, and it just makes me want to get more playful with my own stuff as well.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the big two that I wanted to share today. I've got another kind of system I use to manage my neighborhood. So a lot of times, my neighbors kind of found out what I did, and we built a whole community management system where we manage the volunteers in our neighborhood. We can see any types of incidents that are happening. But again, we built a front end for that too. Pori is a great app that I use, actually has a Notion beta coming out, but allows you to take your Notion and kind of put it, and I know there's a bunch of probably websites that do this now, but allows our neighbors to kind of submit issues into another type of Airtable where we can come in here and then look up issues about what's going on in the neighborhood. But it just gives, I think, everyone in my community a central place to go and say, is there some way I can, help you do something or not do something? Because we really had no way of doing this. Like some people on Facebook, some people was next door. It was kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, I could see this being very valuable at our local fire department.
Yeah. So exactly. Fire departments are a great thing. So I guess all that to say is like, really try to think about, when you think about what I call a life stack, when you think about your life stack, try to really focus on like, what are you trying to do? Like for me, everything starts with an app I created a while ago called Our Balance. It just passively keeps track of my day without me having to think about it. And then I've got my Dare table, my Care table. The Dare table is really about my values. This is all on the board. My Care table is really about my experiencing my time. And last but not least, like the neighborhood app that I showed you and my habit store are really about like how we share that out to the world. So that was kind of my 10-minute ended up being 25-minute demo of like what I do. But hopefully,
but I mean, it's so rich, and
there's.
Oh, I'm sure. People are already asking, kind of like, "Do you have templates for this? How do we begin?"
Yeah, everybody wants templates. Yeah. We're going to actually be giving away some type of template at some point. I just don't know when or how we're doing. I've got a team of people building like fun little things that are very community or personally inspired soon. And I keep bugging Marie. I'm like, I want to collaborate with you so much more, because I think
I am down.
I don't know. I maybe I need to take a Notion mastery class first. But this whole thing was about neurodiversity and looking at how we deal with feelings. You saw how I deal with kind of my thoughts with my dare table, my feelings with my care table. But what about coping? I think there are some really interesting tools out there if you're into kind of thinking about neurodiversity and coping. One of the things I'm challenged with is communication skills. I've been told my whole life, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe it's your ears, right? Maybe my mouth is fine. But two things I absolutely swear by are Grammarly and Halo. Grammarly, as a lot of you guys know, will check your grammar, but also check your tone detection, I think, on your pro account. And Halo is a band you wear on your wrist that listens to you talk all day and tells you how you're sounding.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a great. And battery's life on it is great. People are like, I don't want to give my data to Amazon. I'm like, oh my God, you order like everything from—
You already are.
Yeah. Feminine products to cat litter. And like, you're telling me you don't want to hand out, you got an Alexa in your house. Like you've done it. You might as well benefit from it. Rejection sensitivity is another one I want to show you guys. I am horrible with vanity metrics, any metrics that kind of tell me about popularity of anything. There's a tool I really love by the guy named Ben Grosser. There's a link to it on the board that takes Facebook and removes all the dates, times, and vanity metrics. Does the same thing to Twitter. So you really can't see like how many tweets something had or how popular someone is, because everything is just removed. And rejection sensitivity is a really, really kind of huge issue for a lot of neurodiverse people. Another app I really love is something called Time Well Spent. Anytime you're shopping online, it turns the prices into minutes. So you basically give it how much you make a year, and then it takes any time it sees the price and converts it. So, again, there's a difference in something being too expensive and taking too much time. Burnout is something I'm super experienced with, as like so many of us are. But like when I talk to people about like autistic burnout, is like try to map this idea of human being versus human doing. So think about your flow, how you get to burnout, where burnout happens for you. But remember, burnout's part of a larger cycle. And think about it. Take time to write it down. So once you hit burnout, or you're attempting to come to burnout, you know where you're heading. Because I think once you kind of can see the long tail of that, you can either try to avoid it, or it can be less of a burnout. The other thing with burnout is this idea of like what I call kind of our team reaction, team responses. We talked about responses and reactions earlier, but if you find yourself more on the hyper empathy side, you need to focus more on self-care than if you find yourself more on the angry, kind of selfish side, where you need to kind of focus on your reactions to other people. Sensory overload's the last one in these tip section, which is super favorite tip or tool of that I really like is Endel. Endel does a great job of masking noise because it also uses circadian rhythm. Remember, it always goes back to the brain. Let's work with our brains. I love that. And then at home, as you can imagine, because of my system, my whole house is also automated into my dare and care tables. So as the seasons change in my care table, it actually changes the environmental settings in my house. So there's some high tech that does that, such as the AC systems, the lighting, the music that gets played, and it's all sensory driven. But then there's some low tech stuff we do. So our family actually goes out and gets different candles and hand soaps and things like that for each season. So hopefully there's some fun little things in there for people to think about when we get into some of these, I think, quick wins for the art of appiness and thinking about apps and our feelings.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's so tricky because we're kind of zooming out and showing like this sort of just big, beautiful possibility, right? And I know it might be intimidating for some folks to just get started, but I just think being aware that we can use tools to help us. It's not just like demonizing technology and sort of, like you said, like we don't need to escape these. We need to make them actually more useful because they're already here and they're already integrated with us. And we just need to be more mindful about how we're actually using them.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it can seem wrong, but like we built the board so that you can just hit the big points, right? You know, the first big point was realize you kind of have a relationship with a machine. Second big point is realize that machine and your brain work together, and those working together happens in different places. Those happening in different places can have different triggers. Realize there's a lot of misinformation about what you could or should be doing. Realize there are people who are very vested in working with their emotions and tools together. If you have some of these neurodivergent challenges, consider augmenting those with tools. And finally, if all that was too much, here are some of the things that I like to use and some of the things I like to read. I'm a big book reader. When Things Fall Apart by Pema Children is one of the most powerful books I've ever read, because it just deals with so many of, I think, the really difficult traumas that I've experienced in my life. And, Maria, when you and I started talking about this, we talked about how, productivity is just kind of this veil for working with your feelings.
It's like a means to an end. It's not like we're trying to be productive. We're being productive toward a thing, toward something, toward a better life. And so it's a means, not the end. Yeah.
And it's like I said earlier, it's a way of experiencing your time. There's only one thing every single person has to do who stayed this far in the video. You have to at some point leave the earth. Everything else is a choice, And I end every keynote I do all over the world with the same saying: we don't know how to measure what we care about, so we care about what we measure. So just be thinking really about like what you care about. And for me, that was creating a system of values. Maybe for you, it's priorities. There's lots of words for these types of things. Just don't beat yourself up if you find yourself spending 3 days reorganizing your task list because you're just dealing with some feelings that are difficult. Don't beat yourself up if you go on a bender where all of a sudden you're super focused on your health, right? Because, I think everybody kind of goes through these phases where I got into a whole productivity phase, but then I got into like a whole health phase, but then I got into like a whole, phase where I focused on my family, because I hadn't been paying attention to them. Then I got into a whole phase where I focused on like going outdoors and being nature driven. Then I got into a whole phase where like I was a witch. Again, I have a whole series, I have a whole chart on that situation, right? Because we all do this too, right? These are kind of the life periods that people end up in, so maybe you're in your productive period, but you probably remember a health period. You probably remember a value period where suddenly your family membered. You probably, you would love to spend more time outside. And a lot of times, maybe these are good values for you. Maybe you've got health values. Maybe you've got productivity values. Again, your values don't have to be kind of the end all be all, but they have to be part of a framework that kind of gives your life some meaning, because listen, some days it's hard. I'm just now coming out of a period of really deep depression. So, I had to take a couple of weeks off of work because I was like so anxious, and, I had so many dark thoughts that just made me feel like I can't function. This is really, really scaring me. And I know what it's like. I mean, I've had this depression in the past, and I know how it can stop me in my tracks. The big difference between this depression and one from 2015 and another one from 2007 and one from another one is this time I had tools to actually work with those feelings. So in 2015, I thought I was going to have to go into a psychiatric hospital like I did when I was 18, right? But in 2021, I actually had the tools to come in here and look at my behavior. So this is literally from March until May 7th, and see where these things were happening, see the people I was connected to, and could they be influencing it, and actually use the systems effectively as they were designed. Skills over pills.
I love that.
And there's nothing wrong with being a machine or a cyborg or a robot. Let people call you anything you want, because if you can live, if you can make it through the day, you've done better than 99% of the people you have who are lying about making it through the day.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think right now too, just post-pandemic, like you said, there's just sort of a collective trauma. A lot of folks are struggling in ways that maybe they never did before, or it's more confronting now. And so I'm hoping there's a little bit more compassion even for seeing people's real lives and just understanding that everyone's going through something different. We don't really know. People trying to work from home while having kids, but we didn't have the setups for that before. Just a lot happening for people. And so I just love how you're showing and demonstrating that these tools can support us in that mental health.
And also find people. Like my phone number is literally on my website. I must get 10 calls a day from random people from around the world. Some of them are crying, some of them are happy, some of them just thank me. right? The fastest way to cure loneliness is to talk to someone, right? Get a Google Voice number so you can mask yours and put your phone number out there, you know? And if you're watching this and you made it an hour and a half, like, you literally can call me and I will literally take time to talk to you. Like, I don't have a business that involves like helping people in any way other than I care, because I can't tell you how many people have called me who were going through a bout of depression, and it helped me realize like the fragility of it all. And the pandemic it was so hard for so many people.
Yep. Yeah, that was beautiful. Simone was saying, thank you for expending your energy to do this session. And I invite anyone, if you have any questions for Chris or myself, like, please feel free to put them in the chat. Like, I just love hearing your opinions, seeing your thinking in action, like to really see, again, the way that you live values through your tools is super inspiring. It also makes me feel like I'm not alone, right? Because in some ways I thought, am I kind of crazy the way I'm spending this much time in Notion, or the way I've given my life order and like feeding it with this wonderful information? It feels good for me. And so it's weird to have people criticize that. And I was like, hold on, if I'm able to get my work done and feel really good and notice my patterns, like, what is that? How does that impact you? So it's been really nice to kind of see someone that I'm like, Chris's brain. Yes, you get it. Your heart and your brain and your values are showing in your tools. It's been really fun.
Marie, I mean, you've taken like what worked for you and to address some of your neurodiversity, and you've externalized it. You know, you keep saying, you know, I put data in this and I get feedback. I mean, literally, that's cyborg principle number one. Right? You know, like literally it is like, and I think it's so important that people who look to you and follow you and know what you do and see you as a role model and inspiration. I mean, you're in so many ways imparting a lot of wisdom, right? Because, you know, one of the things I remember you and I talking about was like, my publisher told me once, don't tell people what you know, tell them how you think about it.
Yeah. And
so much loneliness in my life was abated the moment I stopped telling people what I knew and started telling them what I thought.
And I think that's actually in a way a cure for imposter complex, right?
Yeah.
When you share your thinking and then you're not worried about being an expert or saying the right thing. And it's like, this is what I think. This is my belief. This is my opinion. Your perspective is unique.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk, I think, on social media too, about people, you know, like saying, you know, my experience. And I think that's a very powerful thing to say. It is my experience. It's just such a powerful, good time to be alive, even no matter where you are. I'm just, you know, I was just explaining this. Just find people, find your tribe. You know, maybe Marie's your tribe. Maybe I'm your tribe. Maybe you're your tribe, but find them. Because there are more people out there who want to help you than you possibly know. And the one thing I know for sure is the minute you need help, what you're really saying to the world is you want to help. So just find that stuff. Stop valuing your schedule. Start scheduling your values. Don't count your steps. Take your steps. Yeah, I got 1 million of them.
So good. Yeah, there's like lots of little moments I could capture. I could spend hours in your brain. Ashlyn was asking, any part of my Notion setup workflow that's been an aha moment for you? And do you mean in terms of seeing Chris's setup? Because anytime I see something that you're showing, I'm like, I need to go back and make the like assets table that connects to the. There's always. And we were just, you know, chatting last night on Twitter about how do we approach our mood, like putting in a feeling that could show me a dashboard that then I can kind of approach my work in a different way. So we were playing with that a little bit last night. So I'm always going back and making those little tweaks to, and even the intentions, actually, that was something that you showed every day in the morning, you creating an intention for the day. So I think I've tended to use my journal a little bit like a end of day wrap up, but it's so powerful to start the day with, how do I want today to go? And how do I want to feel today? And what's going to help me get there? So I'm always just learning from seeing how you set your stuff up.
Yeah, you know, and the reason I like intentions is because, again, you know, I like the idea of being a techno-pagan, right? Because it just sounds fun to say. But also, like, intentions are like so gut focused versus like tasks. Right? It's my intention to do this. And when I think about kind of my intentions, you know, I mean, it's a little bit of extra work, but taking time every day to come in here and put my intentions, you know, this day, what day was this? This was like May 8th. You know, I had the intention to embrace unorthodoxy. You know, I had an intention to embrace agility, and taking time to write that stuff down, when you can. Again, it's a severe luxury to journal in the beginning, middle, and end of the day. But man, does it make a difference?
Is it worth it?
Does it make a difference? It was so worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, and as Ashlyn was asking, like in terms of my own well-being, I will say that journaling, even the limited journaling that I have done, has just been so interesting for noticing patterns, to notice when am I more in flow, and days of the week being more effective or sort of more fun, more joyous. Even things like, what days of the week do I have more sex? Like, I find that stuff really interesting. Like, what are the conditions that are making me more creative or more spiritual or whatever? So it's been fun to see that data.
Also, I mean, because you've got dates in Notion and Airtable, all these tools, you can also like take those dates and do things with them. So depending on what hemisphere you live in, I'm sure you could create a lookup that dates that fall or spring, dates that look up that are fall, seeing your tasks in your life through that, seeing your spending through seasons instead of months is so powerful. The other thing I always tell people, especially around budgets, when I talked about budgets and money earlier in my particular Airtable, but I think seeing your spending as it relates to the values in your life is super, super interesting, because suddenly it's the difference between like your spending as it relates to like, your must-have spending versus your, sort of have spending, because those types of bills by value, spending by value kind of gives you a whole different way of understanding, because your money, let's be honest, your money is the fastest way to know what you value.
That's true.
Right. So if I come down here and look at this particular chart, here's my bills by my value. So I have a personal goal to have 33 to 40% of every dollar I spend to be spent in service of someone else. A majority of my spending now goes to work, and that could just be everything from equipment to, web services, etc. But again, just, a lot of stuff seems kind of out there, but the minute you start to say, oh, wait a minute, if I just front-ended everything with values, then all the reports change. Right? Yeah. And if values are what I express forward, and I back-ended everything with seasons, spring, summer, moon cycles, now you've got an up and a down to kind of see your life that, quantified existence is different than the quantified self.
Yeah, I think values is just like a filter for making all of your decisions a whole heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. Actually, someone said that to me earlier, and I love that concept that values are a filter for decision-making. Yeah. Yeah.
Is this like moving me toward or away from, right? It's like, what is this? Is this actually helping? Is it creating more anxiety?
Your Notion always reminded me of, and I remember coining this phrase when I saw one of your videos a while ago. Your Notion was like, I called it a GPS for happy.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what do I want more of in this world? And then I've got dashboards for that. It's like creativity. Great. Like, what does a creative hub need to have in it? What does my inspiration hub need to have in it? What am I clipping? What am I saving? What am I creating? Even things like, what's the ratio of what I'm consuming to creating is important to me to track, right? So I have like roll-ups that show me, in a journal, how many things have I clipped to my library and how many notes and ideas have I created? And I want to pay attention to that to get out of that cycle of clipping, consuming, and like, I should be creating, right? Like, we got to shift that. And that happens more seasonally too. Maybe I'm more creative in certain times of the year, right? Or more effective in the winter because it's like dark and quiet and I can do my stuff. But then the spring is here and I want to be outside in the garden. Like, there's so many fluctuations. I think it's really fun to pay attention to them, and just, I think it's like a tool for being more compassionate too. Be like, it's okay, Marie, you know that every spring you get distracted and you go out into the garden. That's part of the process. What if we planned for that moving forward, right? What if now that we start, the longer you use your tools and you see those monthly seasons, you can start to anticipate a little bit better and be more compassionate with your own behavior.
And again, do you use, I don't know if I've seen a video, do you use your Notion integrate with your gardening?
I have a gardening dashboard, but there's no like smart integrations or anything like that. But I'm sure there's like all sorts of.
I wasn't actually talking about that. But one of the things I always tell people, because people are like, doesn't it take you a long time to do all this? The answer is no. Like, my systems don't take me any more time than just doing the things. People are always like, well, how's that possible? I'm like, oh my goodness. Again, that's where people just get into this idea that they can imagine my life. You can't imagine my life. Like, just stop trying, right? But what a lot of people don't understand is like, also, productivity and these types of tools and these types of logging, they actually enrich those experiences, right? I mean, your mom coming home from vacation in 1970 and putting all the stuff in a scrapbook for 2 weeks wasn't a waste of her time. Would you have told her that? Would you have told your mom in 1980, planning for 2 weeks to go to Disney World, that it was a waste of her time, right? But yet again, the minute we add a tool, values are our compass, Simone. Yeah. The minute we integrate a tool into this, all of a sudden we get super judgmental. And this is why Marie, it makes me so frustrated, because I listen to you talk and all of a sudden I hear all the things I've ever been told, as a kid to now, when I was dealing with stress and trauma by using technology in a way that didn't make me feel beat up or useless or a waste. And I hear people saying, well, maybe that's important to, you, but that would waste my time. Well, good. That's your time. It's like, that's not my time.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. It's like, stay out of mind your own business, go use the other tools that if your priority is just getting the things done as fast as possible, right? It's like, oh, Notion doesn't have a quick add and people get all annoyed. I'm like, well, that's great. Like, I'm not looking at it as a task manager. Like, it happens to also be my task manager, but that's just like one tiny piece of the way that I'm using this for this whole life system. So like, go off, live your life and check things off your list. And I'm going to go over here and be really creative in my life hub.
Yeah. There's that old saying, don't judge a man till you walk a mile in his moccasins. And one of the things I do with my spouse when we became engaged, because like, okay, we're engaged, we got to make sure this is on. Like this is going to really work. Was on the weekends, so on Saturdays and Sundays, my spouse and I trade devices. So I have his device, he has mine. It's one of the only times I get to see anything that happens in his life around social media or him around mine.
Wow.
But he sees my emails, he answers my phone, he texts my friends, I text his friends. If we need to contact someone who's on our device, we ask the other person to do it. So again, by externalizing your life in these systems, right? Also, don't ever let your Notion be a solo project. Find ways to let someone inhabit who you are. I have this concept of what I call an identity condom. And like, if I could just slip into Marie's life, or Marie's Notion for a day, like, yeah, you can buy Marie's template, but wouldn't it be more profound to like use Marie's life for a day if you could drive Marie? That's such an exciting thing that we're heading toward.
That is fascinating. Because like you said, with the iPhone, right? You're like, show me your iPhone and I can tell you who you are.
Yeah, I do iPhone. I do iPhone palmistry. Yeah, people send me their screenshots and I read them for a living. Yeah.
But like you could tell, it's just like looking at somebody's bookshelf, right? You can dive into somebody's tools for a day and you're like, oh, wow, I start to see how this person sees the world and how they think and what matters to them. You can see that very quickly.
Yeah. And we're such a unique time because even younger people today, people who are in their teens, my husband's a school teacher, they're so much further along than you or I were when it comes to productivity and their relationship with time and devices. It's just remarkable. I'm just so inspired by young people today.
Patrick was asking, do you have a favorite wearable app or tech that collects data autonomously?
I mean, the Apple Watch is probably my favorite wearable. I too, because I don't like to take it off, so it has to make it through the night. Over the years, I've had more favorite ones. One of my favorite ones over the years was something called a capture. So you wore it and you tapped on it, and it would save the last 30 seconds of whatever you heard. So think of it as a screenshot for voice. I also had something called a narrative clip that they don't make anymore. It was a little teeny camera that I would wear and it would take a picture every few seconds. So think of it as a screenshot for life. So I think a lot of these things in the past that I absolutely love, my Muse headset, gosh, did I learn to meditate deeply with that thing, because it reads your brain and gives you neurological feedback. So you hear waves crashing when you're discursive and birds when you're not. Do you have a Muse headset?
I do not.
They're Canadian. Maybe we should get them to throw you a bone. Yeah. So yeah, I think anything like that, Patrick, was super important. I mean, the app I created, Our Balance, is my favorite because again, it's anonymous and it's passive. And I just like not thinking about my time and knowing, okay, you're a 9 for the week for your time, which means I got enough movement. I got out of the house. Like, cause with the pandemic, I'm afraid to go out. It's just like, oh my gosh. So I have to force myself, like, go to the grocery store, even though you don't need anything, just go and be around people.
Feel free to drop your links in the chat too, because I know we've got this board, but it'd be cool to just drop a link in there to any of like your apps, the habit store, any of that stuff. Apple is not to be trusted. It has all your data. Everything's got all your data. Yeah.
I mean, everything has all your data. Sorry, I didn't put the board link in here. Oh shoot! I'll find the board link. That I can't do two things at once. All the links are on the board. I get it. A lot of people are very worried about Apple and a lot of these companies and all the tech stuff. That's just not something I've ever really worried about. Thank you, Marie. Because at the end of the day, they've got all your data, whether you want them to have it or not. Right? It's a little too late. I mean, a lot of people decrying privacy, I think it's rich, because where were they 10 years ago? And, we're at the beginning of what they're calling the privacy wars. So maybe that looks different in the future. My biggest gripe with people who worry about privacy is, why don't you care about yourself as much as Mark Zuckerberg? You should be taking a lot more time to really focus on getting that data out for yourself. One of the biggest costs of the privacy war coming up will be the loss of our human kind of censored ideas moving forward. So we'll see.
Interesting.
Yeah, because in parts of Europe, they have this right to forget, where you can ask to be deleted from the internet. Well, a lot of your services break then. And, I'm sure in Canada, Marie, you've seen this, where you go to see a website and it says you can't because you don't live in the right place, right?
This video is not playable. Yeah.
Yeah. So much of what we consider to be a free and open internet is being actually ruined by systems that are looking for privacy. Again, I'm all for safety, not for privacy. I'm very post-private, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah. No, that's fair. It's an interesting perspective that I think it's easy to kind of get swept in thinking certain things about technology, because that's just what we hear. And so we start to fear it. But I just like how you're like, fuck it, let's embrace it.
Yeah, but also I'm not a transhumanist, right? So I mean, again, you've kind of got your quantified. There's even I've got a chart for this. I didn't have it ready, but there's you've got the quantified self. You've got biohackers. You've got transhumanist, right? And then you've got singularitarians, so people who believe that it's just accelerating at this point. I stopped at quantified self. I do a little biohacking, but it's not that much, right? But again, I think, there's a difference between what I'm advocating, kind of the embracing of technology to extend your humanity, versus embracing the technology to extend your supremacy. And I think a lot of people today who use technology, I hate to say it, are supremacists in a lot of ways. A lot of what we're seeing, online or with cancel culture exists because we never were responsible with each other. And I like to remind people that cancel culture exists because responsibility culture doesn't. And I think, being responsible and accountable to yourself and other people is super important. And using technology to make yourself more human and not more supreme is super important. I mean, I'll never show somebody something in technology that you can't do for free. That's one of my tenets. I'll never demo something on stage. I'll never show someone anything that you can't find a free version of. So it'd be interesting to see how much the whole tail setup costs with all the integrations, automations. Not a proper figure, just around. Okay, yeah, I can give that number. So again, my Airtable has the Pro version of Airtable and the Pro Pori and a Pro Miro. So those three things together are $500 a year. The whole system looks the same without the dashboards for about $300 a year. You can do it completely free, but cap your records at, I think, 1,000 or so records a year. So I don't know, Marie, and if you've ever figured this out, but I think back in 2014, I was spending anywhere between $25,000 and $30,000 a year to do something similar. Today, that's a fraction of the cost.
Yeah. Yeah, Pro plan, $20 a month. But if you have automation and basic features in the free version, yeah, it kind of depends how far you want to go with this stuff. But yeah, I think it's worth the time savings. I think it's worth the added joy, happiness, whatever. It's sort of.
Yeah, so if you're spending $500 a year to manage yourself, your emotional health, and your community, right? That's not a bad investment. I mean, people probably spend $500 a year on cappuccino.
There you go.
You spend more money on, right? I mean,
I'm excited to make a cyborg manual with you. I want to make a Notion cyborg manual, user manual.
Oh my gosh, a cyborg Notion user manual with a section on emotions and bodies, right? I just think it's just rich and it's fun.
I love it. This board is awesome.
Oh, thank you. I had a lot of fun making it. And it's just got I know I did sneak it on Marie. I didn't do a proper collaboration with her because she kept saying, "Send me a link so I can see it." And I did the classic thing when you're afraid to show anyone your work before it looks like presentable. I said, "Oh, it's still coming," but like I was cramming. But
and I was like, "Oh no, I didn't do my homework. My parts are empty." But no, I just love seeing again the way you think about time and technology and values is like it's quite unique.
My wall is time. So this clock does a rotation once per year. You'll see right now the hour hand is coming down to 6 o'clock. So we're coming up to the summer solstice. This clock does a rotation once per day. So it stops on, the solar noon and night, and it's got dusk in between. The posters along the back are different points in time. So there's like future Japan, past Japan. And over here, you've got Pangea and the Ice Age. And then over here, you've got the Mayan 25,000 year calendar. You've got the liturgical calendar, the heavens time periods, hell's time periods, purgatory's time periods, the Jewish calendar. And then on this side, you've got the pagan Sabbats. And up top, you got I'm a time scout. It's a company in LA. So they teach us to be temporal travelers. So instead of where you're from, it's when you're from. It's just always been a dream of mine to create. And I think in a lot of ways, I've spent the last 15 years building these systems. So at some point, when it's time for me to go, my family has a way to maybe feel like I'm less far away.
I love that. That's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard because my spouse and I, there's an age disparity between us, about 15 years, 20 years. Sorry, I didn't think for a second. It's like when we finally met each other 6 years ago and we talked about getting married, like I had to starting to think about legacy. And I think a lot of people think about legacy today, but it's so much different loving people knowing you're going to leave them.
Yeah.
Because like to me, like the greatest love in the world is loving someone so well that when you're gone, your love is just omnipresent in how they express who they are.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so curious how similar or different does your partner see time and see the world? Like, are you guys able to have these incredibly rich conversations about this stuff? Or is he like, oh, that's your stuff, I don't get it? Like, I'm just so curious about that.
No, we don't have any. I mean, when we first met, we've met. You need to tell Marie how you met your spouse, but unless everybody knows it. But when we met, I met him on a gay dating app, and what I did was I didn't send a hello or a hi or anything. I sent him a screenshot of my filter selection so he could see like how I picked him, and he just loved that concept, the kind of filter selection concept. And I think it's super important that you meet someone who finds you interesting but doesn't find you fascinating, right? Because because you never want to meet, you never want to marry someone who becomes
sees you like a specimen.
or a fan. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's so funny. It's like I said earlier, like there's a difference between wanting to be with someone and wanting to be them. So no, my spouse is a high school theater teacher. My joke is, if you're going to be with me, you better know a lot about high school drama. Right. But like when I started doing my studies on time with him, it was one of these things where he understood what I was talking about because he benefited from my work, but he didn't actually like have any of the heavy work, because like dealing with time and thinking about it is also really heavy. It can be very, very stressful. This is a diagram I created on how to think about making your values visible. So just taking the regular calendar and moving it from appointments, but adding the different layers back in time and forward in time that you might have to deal with. So, appointments are all about the now, but backward in time actually goes through the things you valued in the past. Forward in time goes about the things you value in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. To me, this stuff is just so fascinating because it makes sense when I see a picture of it, but I would never have I don't know that I would have come to that conclusion. I just think it's really interesting. Again, you seem to like see systems so easily, so visually, like you've just got this.
Yeah. So I was medicated from 18 to 42. And when I came off, they tapered me off the antidepressants for 3 years. After I tapered off of them, everything just, I don't know. It's because I'm really crazy. I can't even say this on camera. I've never said this in public, but I see time. I see time like you taste chocolate. I see time on people. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can tell by the way that you assemble these visualizations and the way you see stuff. It is quite unique. I wish I could like download elements of your brain into my brain, because that sequential processing is something like I find like a huge struggle, giving things order. Like I can categorize things, but it still feels very messy. And so there's that element of time that I think is quite like obviously a strong sense that you have in the world.
Well, systems of time are, let me show you this one. This is a great chart I created on systems of time. I think you'll like a lot. This is something that, if you go through kind of human existence, like how we do time now is not how we've always done time. So, originally there was this concept of kairos. It was basically unordered time before we had clocks and those sorts of things. We even had words for this sort of thing, like the season of this. And if you think about this chart and you really get zoomed in on kind of what we're experiencing, I coined the term myself, algorithmos. That's not a word anyone uses, so don't try to Google it. But we're basically leaving chronos right now. We're leaving kind of the ordered linear time, and we're starting to kind of migrate to emergent experiences. We're seeing this in all sorts of ways in the world through kind of the way we're expressing ourselves, because where we've gone from subjective bias of you have a feeling that it's time to do crops and stuff, to objective bias, it's time to do crops, to now being told by these systems it's systematically time to do crops. And when I developed this kind of temporal system, and I was thinking about it, it was like someone needs to teach people to feel time, not tell time. Because I come back to what I said at the beginning of this broadcast. So much of the challenge that we have with our minds are time dysfunctions. At the biological level, it's circadian rhythm, but at the emotional level, it's the cybernetic relationship we have with tools. So what is the circadian rhythm for a cyborg who doesn't need a sun or a biological thing to tell the liver to turn on, right? Do you have a meme period during the day? Do you have an emoji period during the month?
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. I love it. I love you. I love any of your tangents that you want to go down.
Thank you.
I know we're like coming up on the 2 hours. I wasn't sure how long this would go, because I feel like you and I can chat endlessly for hours about this stuff, because I find it very, very fascinating. And it's been nice to meet someone else that kind of thinks similarly about their tools, right? I quite appreciate
Can I
that.
do one more image before we wrap up?
Of course, yeah.
So this one is something I created when I started getting into techno-paganism. And this is really important because a lot of people, when they talk about, I'm sure a lot of people have noticed there's a lot of woo in the world lately. There's woo for crystals, there's woo for everything. But I think what we're seeing now, and not so much as woo and magic and all the other things we're calling it, what we're seeing is kind of the innate human desire to control the unexplainable. And I love this chart on the left here, because I think it's magic in a nutshell. When you think about kind of natural phenomena, your body and the stars and the climate, you use science to control it. When you think about natural phenomena and to explain it, but when you want to control it, you use technology. Natural phenomena, you explain with science, you control with technology. But when you're talking about supernatural phenomena, which is real, like this, we don't understand everything. You use religion to explain it, but you use magic to control it. One of my favorite sayings about this is magic is just open source religion, or magic is just open source religion. But when you think about that, we all kind of live in the kind of these new kind of communities of magic, right? So there are some people, whether you're magic based or just technology based, you're very climate or climate centered people, or nature based communities. Community based people are kind of the tribes we see in the social media. These solo self-centered people are kind of, when you say I'm an introvert, and these deity people are people who are like focusing completely on objectifying and vilifying and deifying the personalities of the world. And if you could roll back, because I spent a lot of time in the last 5 years studying kind of paganism and what is the firmware of the human condition? Like, what are we born with? Like, what's the root belief system? And if we started over and all technology was missing, all books were missing, and babies were born, what would they learn all by themselves? And it's this, right? It's this deification, this objectification, this community, this earth-centered thing. The root operating system of humanity itself is found within the most esoteric systems. And there's nothing wrong with saying, if we can use technology to cure diabetes, can we use it to make your day a little bit better by creating magic? Walt Disney has done this in spades, and there's nothing stopping every single one of us from becoming the high sorcerer using your iPhone.
I love that.
Sorry for the magic rant at the end.
I love it. That's a perfect way to end the day. I love it. I'd love to hear from folks, how you're feeling about this, if anything resonated with you, questions you still have. I'm sure. I just feel like I can't wait for our next conversation and collaboration, because obviously we're going to create this Notion Cyborg user manual. That's going to be like step one. And I know there's a bunch of other pieces that are going to lend themselves well to future collaboration. So I'm stoked to know you. I'm excited to learn from you and to get a chance to see such depth into your systems. Like, I really appreciate you sharing the depth that you do. And Wizards Unite, exactly. The visuals are just so helpful, honestly. Like, I feel they give my brain peace. Like, when I can see this stuff in a visual way that I can wrap my brain around, I find it so helpful.
Well, I share a lot of visuals on Twitter, so if you like ranty visuals, I'm the guy. But yeah, the other thing is, if you ever want to just, anyone watching this, if you ever just want to get together and jam some visuals, I can usually make in a visual and order some complex thing really quickly. So if there's some like major problem in your life, I do visuals for all sorts of things. I did a visual for my mother-in-law once, so she could try to figure out why she was having troubles with her sister-in-law. So I literally created a visual for her, and she shared it with her sister-in-law. So this is how I experienced our relationship, and it fixed it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Yeah, but a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a diagram's worth 1,000 feelings.
You have a superpower, no doubt. That is like part of your superpower. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Marie, thank you for having me. Thank you for spending 2 hours with me. If anybody who made it this long, because I can't see the chat or anything else like that, especially you're on YouTube and you watch this for 2 hours, I don't even know if it'll be available later. But I'm so inspired by how openly you've shared your life and your Notion with people. Also, the interviews you've done, you're always just so kind and considerate to other people. But more importantly, you're just so brutally compassionate toward yourself.
I'm trying to be. I mean? Yeah. To be.
Yeah. You're so thoughtful, and the world is really a better place because you're in it.
Oh, well, the feeling is mutual, friend.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks everybody who stayed as long as you did and asked great questions and stuff. So yeah, follow Chris on Twitter. I think it's probably the best place to get in touch with you.
Yeah, I don't do much else.
And maybe we could post that Miro board again if you want to check that out. Because you can zoom in for hours and inspired there. There's is there a next book here, or is there what's happening next for you, either with Airtable or with this system? Like what's around the corner with all this stuff for you?
I've been asked to do another book. The book right now, it's simply called The Art of Appiness, funny enough. But just a tentative title, like you can see what happens to my titles. I'd like to say there's a lot happening to me, but not really. I mean, I've been fortunate that before the pandemic, I was asked to do a lot, but the pandemic has not been easy on me or my family as far as work goes. So the types of things I've been doing have really been getting involved in the community. That whole neighborhood system was built during this time. I've also been doing a lot of interpersonal help. Some people call it mentoring, but that word makes me feel uncomfortable, but I just call it advanced listening. And then, at the end of the day, I try to focus. I've got some good things coming up. I'm going back to Europe. I just spent a lot of time in Europe. I'm going back to Europe to do a big tour this fall. I've been asked to do that. I just want a big contract. We're looking for a co-host. Maybe it'll be Marie in Vegas for a 3-day event in Vegas for about 100,000 people in August. But yeah, I'm weird. I mean, I think if I was on YouTube, it'd be easier for people to keep up with me, but I'm not. So I'm only on YouTube every now and then when someone says, hey, can I talk to you? Or I beg someone to talk to them like I did with Marie. Nothing too big coming, unfortunately. Nothing where I can say you have something to look forward to. Just look forward to being okay.
Yeah. Oh, look forward to being okay. I love that. Well, I look forward to collaborating with you in the future because I just love the way your brain works and I think you're awesome. And I'm so grateful that you came today.
Thank you, Marie. I can't wait. I mean, it'd mean the world to me to collaborate with you. So it really would.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Thanks everybody who came today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And until next time, we'll see you on the internet.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.